Okay, so this is the video for Formal Formative 1 corrections. I'm going to read the questions for you and also the correction list and give you some clues if you need them. Okay, so the 4 containers below were each filled with different gases. You've got 4 containers. The gas in container 1 is made up of all the same type of atoms. So the key words there, all the same type of atoms. The gas in container 2 is made up of all the same type of molecule. Well, keyword there, all the same type of molecule. The gas in container 3 is made up of several different types of individual atoms, which means there's different types of atoms, all individually. And the gas in container 4 is made up of several different types of molecules. So that would be like the container is filled with H2O and CO2 and maybe NO2 or whatever it might be, but it's many different types of molecules. So it says which containers contain pure substances. You got A, B, C, and D there. And so for the corrections here, this is the way you need to be thinking about this question. First of all, I need to define a pure substance in my head. So a pure substance is what? What is a pure substance? You might want to look at the Anchor chart or back of your notes. And next, which containers contain pure substances? So if I know what a pure substance is, then I can identify that there are definitely 2 of those containers that contain pure substances. And then I want you to explain your answer because we all need to see that you all know how to explain why it is that the 2 containers contain pure substances. And that is question 1. In question 2 here, we're trying to figure out if you understand what a characteristic property is. And so a characteristic property is best described as a property of a substance. And so before I ever even look at what the answer choices are, typically if I take a multiple choice quiz or test, what I do is answer the question before I even look at the answer choices. And I know that a characteristic property is best described as a property of a substance that identifies a substance. So I'm going to look for those keywords as I read through the answer choices. It says A, that does not describe the substance. Doesn't sound good. That changes when the amount of the substance changes. That are traits used to identify a pure substance. That describes the number of atoms in the molecules of the substance. Then you need to define a characteristic property, describe what we use characteristic properties for, and then which multiple choice is correct and why. Because if you know what a characteristic property is, and you can describe what we use characteristic properties for, then you should be able to pick the right answer there. Number 3, this one is seeing if you really understand that characteristic properties for a substance do not change unless that substance changes into a new substance. But non-characteristic properties can change for a substance, even if the substance doesn't change into a new substance. So here's how you have to think about it. A student has a ball of wax. The wax is a pure substance. The student removes a small piece of wax from the ball. Which of the following statements is true about what happens to the mass and melting point of the ball of wax after the piece is removed? A, both the mass and melting point of the ball of wax stay the same. B, both the mass and melting point of the ball of wax will both change. C, the melting point of the ball of wax changes and its mass stays the same. D, the mass of the ball of wax changes and its melting point stays the same. So this little organizer here is going to help you think through this. Is mass a characteristic property? That's the first thing you have to know. Is melting point a characteristic property? That's the second thing you need to know. There are 6 examples of characteristic properties, and we typically give 3 examples for non-characteristic properties. You have to know all of those things in order to answer this question. So if the student removes a piece of wax from the ball, what will happen to the mass? Well, it's a non-characteristic property, so what will happen? So if the student removes a small piece of wax from the ball, what will happen to the melting point? Well, the melting point's a characteristic property, so what will happen? So which multiple choices answer is correct and why? You need to fill those out. Number 4, again, do you understand that characteristic properties identify the substance? A student measured the characteristic properties of 3 gases. The student noticed that the substances were all 3 flammable and odorless, but each substance had a different density. What should the student conclude about the 3 substances? A, the substances are not the same. B, the substances could be the same. C, the substances are definitely the same. Or D, more information is needed. Well, again, what is a characteristic property? You need to define it. Then each substance has to have its own set of characteristic properties. Every pure substance has its own set of every pure substance has its own set of characteristic properties. So if 2 substances have only 3 out of 4 common characteristic properties, can it be the same substance? Well, if you know anything about characteristic properties in pure substances, I think you'll know the answer to that. And so which multiple choice answer is correct and why? And the last one is just about analyzing the table here. So using the information about the 4 liquids in the table below, which of the following liquids could be the same substance? You got volume, boiling point, and odor. You got 4 liquids. For the odor, liquid 1 is odorless, liquid 2 is acidic, liquid 3 is odorless, liquid 4 is alcohol-like in smell, like rubbing alcohol. Okay, so which of the properties in the table are characteristic properties? That's the first thing you need to know. Which of the properties in the table are non-characteristic properties? That's the second thing you need to know. Which type of properties do we use to identify pure substances? That's the third thing you need to know. What 2 samples are the same? Explain. So what is the correct multiple choice answer? Well, I'll give you one last hint on that one, and that is, are any of them the same? Do any of them have the same set of characteristic properties? I don't know. This might be a little bit tricky right here. And the last one, short answer, says using information in the table below, the solids are pure substances. Answer these questions. So identify 2 substances that could be the same and 2 substances that could be different. Defend your selection by citing evidence from the data table in the A format. Well, guys and gals, again, do you know what the 6 characteristic properties are? Do you understand that all of those properties have to match for 2 substances to be the same? Do you understand that if even one of them is different, then the substances cannot be the same? Because characteristic properties are the traits that identify pure substances. If you understand that, this question shouldn't be too hard, and all you have to do is cite a couple of evidences from the data table, and you'll be on your way. So there you go, guys. We need to start being more careful when we're reading through multiple choice questions. Take our time and do our best.